Good day everyone, hope you guys have an amazing day today and welcome to chapter 6. And if you guys know, a new chapter, a new graphics video. You guys know what a graphics video is, so we're going to dive straight into it. Well, I'm going to split this video into two parts. The first part is the quick and dirty one. So it's going to go in quickly, tell you what the best settings are for each type of player, and then get out. That's quick and dirty. The second part is something we're going to do a little bit differently. We're going to find the best graphic settings for your particular PC. So whatever machine you have, old, new, the high end, the best, or the absolute potato, you guys can find the best settings for your PC. So let's first cover the section which is the quick and dirty section. This section is just for those who doesn't care about if you want to optimize the best graphics and best FPS. You just want to get the settings done and over with. The first subsection I have for this section is for those who want the maximum FPS possible. You just want to have the most FPS absolutely possible. So to be able to get the most FPS possible in the quickest, easiest way, my recommended mode is in performance mode. Performance mode gives you the most FPS the quickest way possible. For window mode, set it to full screen if you want to get the most FPS. But if you're like me and you like to alt tab a lot and exit the game a lot, setting it to window full screen is sufficient. Then for resolution, set it to your native monitor's resolution, to your VSync off, to your frame rate limit to unlimited. Then for your graphics tab here, all these settings do not affect your FPS at all, so it is up to personal preference. Then for your graphics quality settings, set your 3D resolution to 100%, set your view distance to near, set your textures to low, and set your meshes to low. This just gives you the absolute most FPS that your PC is able to produce possible. And now for the second subsection of this quick and dirty section is for those who want the best graphics quality possible. FPS is not that much of an issue. I am still going to be balancing it out a little bit so you get at least some playable FPS, but we are going to be focusing more on getting the most quality. So obviously if you want the best quality, set your rendering mode to DX12. For windowed mode, obviously if you guys want the best FPS possible, it is recommended to go to full screen at your native resolution. But if you're like me and you alt tab a lot or exit the game a lot, going to windowed full screen is sufficient. Obviously set your resolution to your native resolution, set your VSync off, and your frame rate limit to unlimited. Then for the actual graphics quality settings, for the anti-aliasing mode, I have an NVIDIA GPU, so I use NVIDIA DLSS with the DLSS set to performance. I don't see much of a difference in quality between performance and quality, so I set it to performance to get the max FPS possible. Unfortunately, since I never owned an AMD GPU in my life, I've never known what is the best anti-aliasing mode for AMD users. So if you guys have an AMD GPU, let me know in the comments below what is your anti-aliasing mode that you would recommend, so then other people who has AMD as well can also give that a shot. Then for night lights, I suggest turning it on, your virtual shadows to medium, your global illuminations to ambient occlusion, your reflections to screen space, your view distance to far, your textures to epic, your effects to epic, and your post-processing to epic. Now I know some of you guys in the comments saying that I haven't used Lumen yet. You guys can use Lumen if you guys want to use Lumen. It is dependent on how strong your PC is and if it's able to run it or not. But if you are going to be using Lumen, set it to Lumen High at the maximum. There is a little bit of difference between Lumen High and Lumen Epic, which a little bit of like the lights flashing a little bit, and you can see a little bit of movement in the shadows and everything. But the FPS tank that you get, the FPS drop that you get, is not worth that little bit of extra lighting correctness. So I would recommend doing Lumen High just to save you some FPS while still getting the benefits of Lumen. So that was it for the quick and dirty section. This next section now is for the best graphics settings for your particular machine. This is going to take a little bit of time to actually figure out and actually get going. But once you find those settings, you're going to have the best graphics settings you can for the target FPS you wanted. I'm again going to divide this section into two subsections. The first section if you want the best FPS still while still getting the best graphics, and the second section is by you wanting the best graphics while sacrificing some of your FPS. So for the first section of getting the maximum FPS possible while still getting the best graphics you can possibly get, we are first going to find out how much graphics your PC can actually handle. So some of you may have heard that Fortnite is a very CPU bound game. What this basically means is that your CPU is doing most of the work in Fortnite. So that includes the physics, the effects, rendering all the characters, or even just the running the game itself. So then what we're going to do in this first test of finding the best FPS possible while still having the best graphics possible is by first finding out what is the maximum FPS your CPU is able to generate. Your CPU is not infinite, so we're going to see how much your FPS your CPU is going to generate. Then we're going to increase the graphics so your GPU does some of the graphics work while still not affecting CPU at all. And basically what we're going to do is eventually get your game to the point where your CPU is still generating the maximum FPS possible for a game. So it's still going to be generating the most FPS for a game, so it feels as smooth and feels the best as it possibly can, while still increasing the graphics to the point where it's still not affecting your CPU. So you still get the very best graphics you can possibly get with no impact to your FPS. So the way we're going to start testing this is first launching Fortnite in performance mode. No matter if you're using DX12 before or performance mode before, set your rendering mode to performance mode first. Then set your view distance, your textures, and your meshes to the lowest possible, and then go into a game. So then now once you landed on the ground, it can be anywhere in the map pretty much, because it doesn't really have that much of impact depending on where you are. Go back into your settings and now turn your 3D resolution to the lowest possible, 1%. This is going to absolutely destroy your game. Your game is going to look crap. But basically if you look at the top right corner now, I am outputting around 330 FPS. It does dip to the 200 area. So we're going to give maybe around 310 as the base average of what FPS I am. I am looking at the top, the right number, by the way, the number on the most right. So right now it's about 310, 330. So we're going to give an average about 310. So what that 310 basically means is that that is the most FPS that your CPU is able to generate. There is no impact on your GPU, and it's all just purely just CPU power, and that is the maximum amount of FPS your CPU is going to get. By the way, this is also the maximum FPS your system is able to generate at all. There is no way to increase the amount of FPS that your system is able to generate unless you upgrade your CPU itself. So this is basically the maximum amount of FPS your PC is able to generate. So what you can do now, since we know exactly how much FPS our system is able to generate, turn your 3D resolution back up to a 100% and see how much FPS drop you get. For me, 310. No drop at all, which means that basically we have the best graphics still that possibly get with absolutely no impact to FPS. So let's go higher. Let's go higher. Let's push some of our settings up higher. So let's go push our view distance to Fara and our textures to epic. Let's see how much an FPS impact now it has. It's still hanging. It does drop a little bit, so it is hanging around the 290. It did drop hit up to 300 for a second, but it's around 290. So it is a slight drop in FPS, but you do get much better view distance, and you also get much better graphics. So you do take a slight hit, but at this point, this is basically the best graphics I can get. Actually, I am hitting still 310. I just saw I am hitting 310. You run around a little bit so you get a little bit of the game going, but it did drop up to 310 for a little bit. So I still have a little bit of headroom in terms of what the best FPS is, but I don't want to be pushing my FPS that far. So we're going to let it sit here as basically the best graphics I can have while having no impact to my FPS. And then obviously for those who have a super strong GPU and can still go further, I would recommend then turning on your low meshes to high, and if that still is not having any impact on your FPS, set your rendering mode to DirectX 12. And then once you're in DirectX 12, again, turn down all your settings to the lowest possible. Go into a game and see how much FPS you lose from there. For anti-aliasing, if you do have an NVIDIA graphics card, you can set it to performance mode, and that does give you a little boost in FPS as well. So it will give you more range to then set whatever graphics quality you want to set. And if you guys want to know what settings you should start turning up first to get to the optimal quality you want, stay tuned to later on in the video where I get to explain all that in one easy, concise section. So for the second subsection, for those who want the maximum quality while sacrificing some of your FPS. The amount of FPS we're going to be sacrificing is going to be dependent on how much refresh rate is your monitor, up to about a 165 Hz monitor. So if you guys have a 60 FPS monitor, we're going to be sacrificing enough FPS so the game is up to 60 FPS. If you're like me and you have a 120 FPS monitor, we're going to be sacrificing down to your FPS hits of 120. And if you guys have a stronger than 160 FPS monitor, we're going to be sacrificing only down to 160 FPS. The reason why we're going to be hitting 160 as the upper cap of our FPS is because there is monitors out there that can go up to like 480 FPS or even 540 FPS. Those monitors would have so high FPS that even I don't think many CPUs out there can even hit at all. We're probably going to be going down to performance mode, getting the absolute worst quality possible, and we're still probably not going to hit those FPS. So because of the fact that we're still going to be very quality centered, so we're going to get the most quality possible, we're going to be limiting our FPS to 160. 160 is still a very playable FPS while still getting the maximum quality, which is what we want. So for those who don't know what FPS the monitor is, it's very simple to find. All you need to do is go into system settings and go into display. Select the display that you want, go into advanced display, and then with your chosen refresh rate, set the maximum you can get. I can go up to 144 FPS, but because the fact that I do stream and I don't want screen tearing, which is very ugly to for the viewers, I'm going to put as a multiple of 60, which is 120. So 120 FPS is going to be my limits of what I'm going to hit for my FPS. Now, again, like for the previous section, I do know that my game can process more than 120 FPS in performance mode. It can go up to about 300 FPS in performance mode. So we're going to be skipping that step and we're going to go straight to DirectX 12 to get the best quality possible. If you guys don't know what FPS your PC is able to output, go back to the previous section where you're getting the maximum FPS possible while getting still the best quality possible while affecting your FPS. Again, for the quality settings, before we jump into it, we're going to set everything, including nanite, to the lowest possible. For anti-aliasing, because I do have an NVIDIA graphics card, I am going to use NVIDIA DLSS at performance, because performance and difference between performance quality, I don't see much of a difference, and I'd rather get more FPS. And then with those settings, now we're going to jump into another game. Alright, we are back in game now. As you guys can see, my FPS is currently in around the 220 range. So it's bobs up and down a little bit, but it's around the 228 range. Again, don't forget, my monitor I've set currently is 120 FPS. So our limit, or our goal right now, is to bring our graphics up or bring our FPS down to around 120 FPS. So then with that, we go into our graphics settings, and the settings I recommend start pulling up first is your view distance, your textures, and your post-processing. Apply those settings, and let's see how much impact the has on my game. So now it brought it down to around wow, it doesn't really change much. It's only brought down to about 200 FPS. You make sure to let your game run a little bit, run around a little bit, go look at different stuff. Let the game process a little bit, because it does take a little bit of time for all the FPS to get back, you know, because before, as you guys can saw, before I was like 170, and now back to about 200 FPS, or 180 FPS, as a more accurate one. So I am still above in my upper limits. So because the fact that I'm still on 180 FPS, which is more than the 120 FPS limit that I set for myself, we can still push the graphics up further, so you can get some more graphics while still sacrificing some of the FPS. Now this next section of what graphic settings to turn up next is very dependent on what mode do you primarily play. Do you play Fortnite Battle Royale builds or reload builds, or do you play Fortnite Battle Royale 0 builds, reload 0 builds, or any other of the Fortnite game modes? If you do play builds, I would recommend turning on nanite next, because having shadows, global illuminations, reflections, and effects will tank your FPS if you're in the middle of a build fight, which is not something you want. And also, it's very hard to see the enemies if you're in builds with shadows and global illumination on. So if you're playing builds, my next setting you should recommend turning on is nanite. If you are not playing builds and you play 0 builds, or you play any of the other game modes, then I would recommend turning on your shadows to medium as the highest, global illuminations and reflections onto screens, up to ambient occlusion and screen space, and turn your effects up to maximum. And I am currently in the storm right now. Oh crap. But as you guys can see, my FPS now has dropped down to about 144 FPS. It still has all the shadows and all the very nice little global illumination stuff, and I still have more FPS to spare. So now that I am out of the storm, I am sitting around 160 FPS, dipping down to 150 FPS. The rain effects in the storm, because I have effects onto Epic, does have a little bit of a tank to my FPS. Other than that, I still got about 160 FPS, so I got about 40 FPS to spare. So let's see, we can still push the graphics up even further. Now that because nanite cannot be changed in game, it has to be changed in the lobby. We're gonna go back to lobby, turn nanite on, but we're gonna turn everything down back to the lowest. Because the fact that the way nanite works, it does tank your FPS very significantly. It's actually quite more significantly than we did before. So we're gonna bring everything down back to the lowest again, and we're gonna reset all the settings and see how it would affect us now. Alright, we're back on the ground now. I'm going to be running around a little bit, but you guys can see that we did tank a little bit FPS just by purely turning nanite on before. Remember last time we were about 180 FPS or maybe around the 200 FPS range with all the settings down low and nanite off. Now with nanite on and with still all the settings down to low, we are only getting around 160 FPS around there. 160 drops down to 150, goes up to about 170. So we're going to say about 160 FPS. So it does tank a little bit. Again, like the previous section, we're going to turn on the view distance and textures and the processing all to the maximum because these do have the least FPS impact. And now we're sitting around the 120 range. So again, we're gonna run around a little bit. It does go up. Yep, there you go. So it does running around a little bit later in the game processing. It does make your FPS go up a little bit. So we're about the 120 FPS, 130 FPS range now. So we do have a little bit of FPS to spare. But if I were to say, if I want to have a little bit of extra headroom above the 120 FPS, this is pretty much my limit. I can go up to with nanite on, with view distance maximum, textures and post-processing all at maximum and getting that 120 FPS goal that I have. But then if I do want some extra graphics out of it, I would turn on virtual shadows, global illuminations and reflections up into the second most high setting with the effects onto maximum. Let's see how much of an impact this has on my game. Alrighty. Running around a little bit, letting the game settle a little bit. Now I have dropped down to around 80 FPS. Yeah, around 80 to 90 FPS range. So that definitely does mean I'm losing now too much FPS. My FPS is now lower than my monitor's refresh rate, which means I will feel a little bit. It will feel a little bit sluggish. I will start feeling a little bit of that input lag. So I think the safe bet is by turning all virtual shadows, global illuminations, reflections off, and turning my FX down to low. So that is basically how I find my best graphic settings for my particular machine. For you guys, now you guys know that I now have two options in terms of what I can do. I can either do nanite off and have basically all the settings up to pretty much the max, except for shadows, but shadows does have a very significant tank on my FPS. Or I can go with nanite on, but I don't get any of the effects, the global illuminations or reflections or even the shadows at all. Now, the difference between nanite off and on is quite a little bit hard to explain. Basically, what nanite off does is basically introduces billboards, which is the old-fashioned way of the game showing how far distance object looks like. You guys probably ever seen, if you're gliding in, you can see the trees in the distance starts popping in, like switching textures as you get closer. That is basically the trees from the billboards into the regular objects that you would be able to interact with. That's how the game is able to save on performance and FPS. What nanite does basically now is that instead of having billboards, they're actually full functioning trees and stuff. You can actually see in the distance the trees does move and does have an effect by the weather. What that does though, it does have a massive impact on your FPS. If you're like me and you don't mind the billboard effect or the effect of having the trees pop in and out as you go further or closer away, then I would have set my graphics to have nanite off and have basically everything to max. So I can still get the maximum quality while still having a very high FPS. But if you're like someone who does mind and who does want to not have that popping in and out effect of the trees and this stuff in the distance, then you would then turn nanite on and have the shadows, the global illuminations and reflections and the effects turned off while everything else is on high. So yeah, basically finding your best graphic settings for your particular machine is a bit of a juggling act in terms of what you guys want to sacrifice or what you guys want to keep. If you guys want to prioritize FPS more, then you should sacrifice some of your graphics. But if you guys want to make graphics more, you have to sacrifice some of your FPS. It's a bit of a juggling act, and depending on which graphics settings you really want to turn up or which one you're willing to lose. But all in all, that is basically the way of how I found my best graphic settings for my particular machine. And now you guys can also be able to find the best graphics settings for your own particular machine as well. And other than that, that is basically the best graphic settings you can have for the best graphic and FPS in Fortnite Chapter 6. If you guys have any questions in particular on what each graphic setting does, or what you should turn on or prioritize on for, let me know in the comments below for your questions, and I'll be happy to answer every single one of them. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any more future videos like this. And other than that, I'll see you guys on another video. Bye everyone.